Chapter 9. Dodos, Brigantines and Lords. I jumped onto my bed, down next to the lilo where Salim had slept the night before, and banged my fist against the wall, then jumped up on the bed again and down again, wall again, and I went hrum, hrum, bed again, floor again. This was the routine I'd had when I was small, before Mum and Dad bought me the trampoline. Then the trampoline came, and I jumped on that instead. Then the trampoline broke, but I didn't go back to the old routine because Mum said it would damage the walls and furniture now that I was bigger. So I hadn't done the routine in years. I'd forgotten how good it felt. When I was tired of jumping, I got out some volumes of my encyclopedia and curled up on my bed against the wall and looked at some interesting entries. There was a knock on the door. Kat came in. "Ted," she said. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it. "You've still got your jacket on. Why do you always forget to take it off?" I shrugged and drew it closer round me. "Ted, I need you now," Kat said. She did something odd, which was she sat on the bed next to me. "You're all I've got. Mum isn't talking to me. Auntie Glo thinks I'm Satan in disguise. Dad's home from work now, but he just shakes his head every time I open my mouth." I looked up. "The dodo disappeared, Kat," I said. "What?" "The dodo. It dropped off the evolutionary path." "Right, the dodo. So?" "It disappeared. Darwin would say it wasn't adaptable to survive, so it didn't." "I don't think Salim's dropped off the evolutionary path, Ted." "No, I know, but I've been thinking about disappearances and looking some of them up in my encyclopedia." "Oh, yeah? There was this lord called Lord Lucan. People think he murdered the nanny who was looking after his children and then threw himself off a cliff in remorse." "Perhaps he did. But his body never showed up, Kat. Perhaps he made it look that way, but really went off somewhere in disguise under another name. One theory is that he went off to India and became a long-haired hippie." "I don't see what that's got to do with—" "Then again, perhaps he was murdered himself. Perhaps he's buried under someone's patio." There was a long silence. "That's not very helpful, Ted." "There was the Marie Celeste, too. The Marie Celeste was a 100-foot brigantine ship from New York. It turned up in the Bay of Gibraltar with nobody on board. It was as if they'd been beamed into outer space by aliens." "Ted, I don't think this is a time for joking." I slammed the book shut. "OK," Kat said, "you weren't joking. I should know by now. You never joke. What do you mean?" I didn't really know what I meant. The only thing that linked the dodo, Lord Lucan, the people on board the Marie Celeste and Salim was that they'd all disappeared. I sat looking at Kat's hunched-up shoulders. The room was silent apart from her breathing and mine. Somehow it was a real effort, but I managed it. I put my hand and placed it where her shoulder hunched. It was bony and soft. "Kat," I said, "you and I are together in this. People disappear, and things, most of them, reappear." Kat rested her hand on top of mine, and I saw some tears fall down her cheeks. Her head went off to one side. She was the one who looked like a duck that's forgotten how to quack, and I felt a teardrop fall onto the hand on her shoulder. For a moment I didn't know if it was her hand or mine. I hate touching people. The wetness of the tear and the confusion of hands felt as if neither of us knew where Kat started and I ended. "Ted," she said, shaking her head, "the Marie Celeste people never reappeared, nor the dodo, nor Lord whatever." She stopped and blinked back, another tear. "That policeman was right," she went on. "People don't just evaporate. Salim must be somewhere. If it's my fault he went missing, I have to find him, but I need your help. I need your brains, Ted. Nobody's better at thinking than you are." That was the first time Kat had ever paid me a compliment. I plunged both my hands into my jacket pockets and stared down at my trainers and went, "Hrum," and then I realised that in one of the pockets was an object that shouldn't have been there. I drew it out and Kat and I stared at it. "Salim's camera," whispered Kat. Chapter 10. Love-Hate. Kat grabbed the camera from me and held it in the palm of her hand. "When you took that last photograph," she said, "in the queue for the tickets, you must have put it away in your jacket pocket without thinking, Ted." I reached my hand over to take the camera back. She held it away from me. "How did you feel, Salim?" she whispered, as if he was in the room, "when you realised you'd got into the pod without your camera?" I tried to take it again. She slapped my hand away. "Keep away, Ted. It's my find." Typical cat. One moment she's saying how brainy I am. The next she's assaulting me and telling me lies. Predicting what Cat is going to do next makes predicting the weather seem easier than counting to 3. Cat is not only more unpredictable than the weather, she is also more unpredictable than A. volcanic eruptions, or B. lunatics, or C. terrorist attacks. It is a fact that her name sounds like the first syllables of words like catastrophe, cataclysm, catatonic. In other words, Cat is a walking disaster story, which is what Cat says about me when I drop things, but I think it applies more to her. But sometimes when you least expect it, Cat is nice. When I was small, she'd read stories to me about talking bears and magic wardrobes and take me over to the pond in the park to show me the ducklings. At school, she'd stick up for me in the playground when the rough boys pick on me. Mum says we have a love-hate relationship. She says that when I was a baby and Cat was 2, she found Cat leaning into my buggy one day and kissing me all over my face. Maybe I squirmed, because the next thing Cat did was grab a hairbrush and thump me on my head. Mum had to drag her away to stop her from murdering me. When we got older, Mum was always telling us to play nicely together. Cat's idea of nice play was to line up her naked Barbie dolls with their savage haircuts and strange biro markings and play hospitals. She used toilet roll as bandages and cut into them with nail scissors and squirted tomato ketchup on them. She would tell me to help her as the patient was dying. "Pass me the scalpel," she'd order me. "What scalpel?" "Any scalpel." I looked about. "There is no scalpel." "A pretend scalpel, Ted." "There is no pretend scalpel, Cat." "There it is. It's right by your hand." "Cat, there is no scalpel by my hand, only a toilet roll." "You're supposed to be the nurse," she shouted. I blinked. Nurses are supposed to be women, and I was a boy. I could not be a nurse. "Try to play, Ted," Mum said, looking on. So I went, "Nina, Nina, Nina," and turned the lamp switch off and on, and after that I was always the ambulance. But Cat always wanted me to be the nurse, and maybe that was why she went on being angry with me. Then my syndrome was diagnosed by the doctors. "Why does he have to get all the interesting diseases?" she moaned to Mum and Dad. I don't remember what they replied. Right now, Miss Catastrophe was examining Salim's camera, and I swallowed the hot, huffy feeling I had back down my esophagus. "He used up 18 shots, she said. "He kept clicking as we crossed over the bridge, remember? He took one of you and me, Cat, and I took one at the eye, just before the strange man came up who gave us the ticket." "The strange man," Cat said, looking up. "I wonder." I nodded. I'd been wondering about him too. "Do you think these pictures might be a clue, Ted?" "I don't know." I tried to touch the camera one last time, but again Cat snatched it away. She turned its sleek silver sides around in her hand. "I wish it was digital like Dad's," she said. "Then we'd be able to see the pictures now. With this old-fashioned kind, you've got to open it somehow." She shook the camera and shrugged. "Don't know how. You get the film out and take it to the camera shop to have it developed. It costs money, and you have to wait. What a palaver." She started fingering buttons and shaking it. "I think we should give the camera back to Aunt Gloria," I said, "because she is Salim's next of kin." "What's that got to do with it?" Cat said. I was about to explain how the next of kin inherits the property of the people who have died, and how perhaps this also applies to the property of people who have disappeared, when the doorbell rang. Cat and I jumped up. "Salim!" Cat said. She dropped the camera on the bed and we ran out of the room and down the stairs. But in the hallway, just coming in through the front door, which Mum was holding open, wasn't Salim. Only 2 grown-up people, a man and a woman. The man was in uniform, the woman wasn't, and this meant the opposite of what you might think, that the woman was in charge. This was because she was plain clothes. He wasn't. It was the police. Chapter 11. Margins of Error. Minutes later, in the living room, the atmosphere was hot and close. Everyone was polite. Everybody was calm. But you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. That's what people say when invisible feelings vibrate in the air, like irons do just before an electric storm. Mum and Aunt Gloria were on the sofa. Aunt Gloria held a glass of brandy. Dad was standing, leaning back against the wall near the door. Kat and I stood beside him. The man, a detective sergeant, took notes, seated at the table. His boss, the woman, had taken another chair and was sitting in the middle of the room. She was thin and short, with a blue skirt and jacket and a white blouse, and her eyes moved quickly around the room like lightning strikes. First, she said she was Detective Inspector Pierce and was in charge of finding Salim. Then she asked questions. Who everyone in the family was, why Aunt Gloria was visiting, and why she planned to move to New York. Then she asked to see the contents of Salim's backpack. She took his things out one by one. I looked on carefully because in good detective stories what people leave behind and don't leave behind can be a clue to where they have gone. There was a spare sweater, a pair of jeans, a pair of socks, underwear, pyjamas, another sweatshirt and a tiny towel. These didn't tell me very much. Then there was a battered paperback entitled Murder at 12,000 Feet, a guidebook to New York, brand new with no creases, and a tiny address book. Finally, there was a Swiss Army knife and a keyring with a model of the Eiffel Tower on it, but no keys. There were no wash things like a toothbrush, because these were still in the bathroom, I remembered, on the shelf over the basin. Detective Inspector Pierce held up the empty keyring with her eyes scrunched up. Aunt Gloria explained that Salim had brought the keyring back from a school trip to Paris, then that she had rented out her house in Manchester and given all but her own set of keys to the tenants. At present, she said, Salim had no keys to anywhere. There was silence. Then the inspector looked over to where Kat and I were standing. "You two were the last to see Salim, I understand," she said. Kat told her in a quiet voice, not like her normal voice, all about the strange man, the free ticket, tracking the pod and waiting for Salim to come down, and how he hadn't. "We should never have left them to get the tickets on their own," Mum said when Kat finished. The inspector's hand waved through the air. What this meant I do not know. Then she turned back to Kat. "You say you tracked the pod?" Kat nodded. "For half an hour you did nothing but stare up and watch the London Eye go round?" "Well," Kat considered, "we walked back so as to be able to see better. If you're too close you can't see the pods go round properly without getting them muddled, and we chatted a bit." "Without getting them muddled," Inspector Pierce repeated. She interlocked her hands and rested her chin on them. "We chatted a bit. You don't have to believe us. It's not a question of believing or disbelieving. But we tracked it, we did. We're sure, aren't we, Ted?" I said. "Sure, 100%. No, Kat." Kat's eyes and lips scrunched up. "Sure, 98%, yes," I said. The inspector looked at me without saying anything. The corners of her lips turned up, which meant she was slightly amused. Then she tapped her nose with her interlocked fingers. "So," she said, "you'd allow for a margin of error?" "Only a small one," I said, 2%. 2%. "In every human observation," I explained, "there is a margin of error. This is because our senses are not foolproof. In fact, some people believe that 100% certainty is impossible to achieve." I stopped and put my head on one side. "As humans, we cannot even be sure that the sun will rise the next day. Our assumption that it will do so is arrived at by a process of induction. This is a process where probability, based on past observation, allows us to predict things like weather patterns." "I've had enough of this," Aunt Gloria interrupted. "Sunrise, sunset, up and down wheels, tracking pods. This is not a fun fair. This is about my son, my only son. He's missing. What I want to know is, what's been done about it?" "We're doing all we can," Inspector Pierce said. She unlocked her fingers and smoothed her skirt. "I know you're fretting." "Fretting? You make it sound as if I've lost a handbag." "It's early days. He's only been missing a few hours. And in the vast majority of cases, young people who disappear like Salim are found within 48 hours. 48 hours? We'll miss our flight to New York." 48 hours, but usually sooner. But from the word go, we take the disappearance of minors very seriously. That's why I'm here." "He's not a minor, he's my boy." Mum put an arm around her. "Glow," she whispered. "We're doing everything possible," Inspector Pierce repeated. "Such as?" Dad said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. The inspector sighed. We've begun checking the CCTV footage of the pods. No camera can see everything or everybody, but there's no sign of anything untoward happening that morning. Just the normal shots of normal tourists enjoying the view. We've also been taking statements from other people who rode the eye at the time. Unfortunately, the numbers run to 300 plus, and we can only check the ones who paid by credit card. We've no way of checking those who paid cash. But again, so far nobody remembers a boy matching your son's description. We've also checked hospital admissions. Aunt Gloria's eyes went round and large at the word hospital, but nothing. Perhaps he's still just lost, said Dad. That's indeed the likeliest explanation, Inspector Pearce said. There was a pause. Perhaps everyone was doing what I was, imagining where lost was. I pictured Salim lost on London's underground system, getting on and off trains, wandering down passages, not sure if he should be on a north or southbound train, confused by the colours, not knowing that black stood for the Northern Line, our line. I was thinking how if I'd sat next to him on the tube early in the day instead of Cat, I could have explained all about the London Underground map being topological and how you were meant to read it, and then Salim would have found his way home with no problem and perhaps be here now. We need some more personal details, Inspector Pearce said. She looked towards Aunt Gloria. I'd like to ask you some private questions. Mum got up. Let's leave, she said to the rest of us. Dad opened the living room door, leading Cat out by the elbow, but Aunt Gloria grabbed Mum by the hand. You stay, Faith. I need you, please. Mum sat down again. She stared over at me as I waited to see if Aunt Gloria would need me too. Mum mouthed something, but no sound came out. It was as if she thought I was deaf and dumb and able to lip read. I blinked. Then she said the word out loud. Scoot! That was the second time that day Mum had told me to go away. I shuffled out after Dad and Cat and went into the kitchen with my hand flapping. Dad closed the kitchen door behind me. The police would find out more than I would, and it wasn't fair. A heavy feeling like you get when you eat more calories than you can burn off efficiently came down inside of me. Cat had her face pressed against the fridge freezer. A tear trickled down her cheek, and she was punching the side of her head with her fist. This meant she had the same feeling. It was called frustration extreme. Chapter 12. Another fine mess. The wall between our kitchen and the living room was not thick, and we could hear murmuring voices. Well, Cat, said Dad. Well, Ted. He quoted a line from his favourite films, Laurel and Hardy. Another fine mess. Cat started crying more and didn't seem able to stop. Dad put his hand on her shoulder, but this was not a good idea because it made her cry louder. Through her sobbing noises, I tried to hear what the voices from the living room were saying. I heard odd words. Salim? No. Never. It was always Aunt Gloria's voice. I deduced that this was because A, she was nearer the kitchen, and B, she spoke more loudly than either Mum or the inspector. Then I made out a whole sentence. This was because Aunt Gloria shouted it like a thunderclap. Salim would never run away from me. I put my hand over my ears. I felt air pushing itself against my face. My mouth opened and closed. I said. Dad opened the door to our back garden. It was early evening outside. He motioned for Cat and me to go out with him, but Cat shook her head. So I went out with Dad on my own. We walked down the path towards the garden shed, past our line of washing, which flapped in the breeze, light, southwesterly. Dad, I said. Yes, Ted. What's the probability that Salim has run away? Dad gave a scrunched-up look. I'd hardly blame him if he had. Then he shook his head as if he didn't mean what he'd just said. I don't know, Ted. I think it's more probable he's lost somewhere, trying to get back. 60-40. Sorry? 60% probability he's lost, 40 that he's run away? Maybe 70-30, I don't know. Then why hasn't he used his phone? Maybe he's run out of credit. Then why isn't he answering our calls? Maybe he's run out of charge. Dad looked up the 3/4 moon that was rising to the east of the city. I know, a lot of maybes. He sighed. Salim and your Aunt Gloria have a strange relationship, Ted. For all that she nags him and he backchats her, I think they are close. Close? Like weather gets close? No, close, like near, close to each other. That's why I wouldn't have thought he'd run away. Not in a strange city. Not without having anywhere to go. I remembered Salim's joke fit because he didn't want to go to the art gallery. I remembered him stamping his foot when Aunt Gloria had tried to suggest leaving the eye until later. I'm good at counting things and timing things and remembering things, but I find it hard to know whether people like each other or not. I have a basic 5-point code to reading people's faces, which Mr. Shepherd has taught me from cartoon pictures. Number 1. Lips up, loads of teeth showing equals very amused, happy. 2. Lips up, no teeth showing equals slightly amused, pleased. 3. Lips pressed together, slightly turned down, equals not amused, slightly cross, or else puzzled, hard to tell which. 4. Lips pressed together, eyes scrunched up at the same time, equals very displeased, angry. 5. Lips round like an O and eyes wide open equals startled, surprised. I thought about Salim and the way his eyes shifted around the ground a lot, and how he'd looked up towards the sky when Aunt Gloria was talking, but it didn't fit into the 5-point code. I didn't know what emotion it matched. I thought of him in the queue to get on the eye, squinting upwards, looking down, turning this way and that. I thought of him shuffling in his sleeping bag, sighing in his sleep. Recognising the 5 basic emotions is one thing. Knowing how they mix together is another thing. It is like knowing about secondary colours as well as primary colours. Blue and yellow are easy paint colours to recognise, but it isn't easy to predict if you mix them together, you get green. So if they are close, I said to Dad, that means Salim wants to be near Aunt Gloria always and wouldn't run away? Well, not necessarily near always, but there again. Dad ran a hand through his hair so he looked like Stan Laurel. We don't really know your Aunt Gloria that well, or Salim. It's been 5 years since we saw them last. The arm of a shirt sleeve on the line flapped into Dad's face and got tangled around his neck. He laughed, which seemed a strange thing to do when you were in the middle of a crisis. He peeled the sleeve out of his way. Maybe they are close, like the weather, Ted. Combustible, who knows? All I know is it's another fine mess. Chapter 13. The Eye of the Hurricane. Kat called out to us from the kitchen that we were wanted back in the living room. When we got there, Aunt Gloria had finished her brandy and was staring at the bottom of the glass, and her lips were turned down, which meant she was sad, and her eyebrows were hunched together, which meant she was also cross. Inspector Pearce rose to her feet and promised to let us know if there was any news. Then she said there was one last thing. Did Aunt Gloria have a photograph of Salim? Aunt Gloria took a credit card holder out of her handbag. I've only got this, she said. It's a bit old. The rest are in the photo albums. They're on their way to New York by sea freight. She handed the picture over. Your son is 13, you say? Aunt Gloria nodded. 14 in July. How old is he in this? 8, said Aunt Gloria. The inspector said the police would need something more up to date. Aunt Gloria said, you can get something from his father when you contact him. I remembered Salim's father only barely. He was an Indian man called Rashid, and he worked as a doctor. Aunt Gloria and he had divorced years ago. Shouldn't you call Rashid, Glo? Mum said. You never know. Salim might have gone there. It's possible. Aunt Gloria shook her head. Salim would never do that. Besides, Rashid and I are not on speaking terms. Salim goes over there every other weekend, and that's it. Inspector Pearce examined a knuckle on her hand as if there was something wrong with it, but I could see no cuts or bruises. And what did he think, your former husband, she said, about Salim and you going to New York? Aunt Gloria didn't reply. He must have said something about it. Not a lot. I said he could have Salim for 2 weeks at Christmas and in the summer. That seemed fine by him. There was another silence. Who knows, Aunt Gloria added. Maybe he does have something to do with this. That's what you're driving at, isn't it? Inspector Pearce tucked the snapshot into her pocket and didn't answer Aunt Gloria's question. This and your description will do for now. She stood up. This is my card with my direct phone number. I'll leave it here on the mantelpiece. If Salim comes home or gets in touch, or if you have any further thoughts, call me." Aunt Gloria shrugged and said nothing, but Dad said we would. Then he showed her and the other policeman to the front door and they left. I watched from the window as they got into a white and blue police car and drove away. Mum asked Kat to help her prepare some sandwiches. Aunt Gloria had another brandy. Dad came back and opened a bottle of wine. That made it just like Christmas evening, except it was getting late, and it was still light outside and nobody was telling jokes or acting jolly. "Do you mind if I smoke?" said Aunt Gloria. Nobody answered. She took the silence as permission and lit up a cigarette and sat puffing in silence, even after Kat put a plate with cheese and lettuce sandwiches on her lap. She stared into space, inhaling and exhaling. Apart from her arm travelling with a cigarette holder up to her lips on average every 12 seconds, she was still. It was a strange silence. I realised that ever since Aunt Gloria had arrived in our house, she'd hardly stopped talking or moving. "Well," said Mum, after everybody had munched what they could of their sandwiches. Me 2, Dad 2, Mum 1, Kat a half, Aunt Gloria none. "Well," said Dad, I almost expected him to say, "Another fine mess," again, but he didn't. "How was work today, Ben?" Mum said. It was a question she asked him every day. "Work?" said Dad. He shrugged. "OK. The barracks is empty now and all locked up. The concrete crushers go in on Thursday. I've a new job on now, down Peckham Way." "Peckham Way?" said Mum. She didn't look that interested. Her eyes stared off into space. "Peckham Rye." There was another long silence. Kat kept winding a strand of hair round her little finger and then unwinding it. I wanted to ask her what she was trying to achieve, but she saw me looking at her and scrunched up her face. So instead I said, "About Salim." Everyone started. "I've some interesting theories which might—" "Hush, love," Mum said. "This isn't the time for your theories." A deep silence fell on the living room after that. I heard the whir of the central heating. A kitchen tap dripped. Dad jangled some change in his pocket. I wondered what the silence was in weather terms. It was hardly the calm after the storm. Perhaps it was a calm in the centre of a storm, the eye of the hurricane. I imagined a whirlwind, dark and swift, and in the middle of it, a gentle oval-shaped stillness, shaped like a bicycle wheel, seen from an angle, the London Eye. Mum shuffled her feet. The central heating stopped whirring. Mum said it was time to go to bed. "It's only 9 o'clock, Kat protested. "Anyway, I'm here, on the couch, remember?" "That's enough, Kat." Mum got up and walked over to the window and looked out. She drew the curtains. "This once you can sleep in Ted's room, on the lilo where Salim—" She didn't finish her sentence, but we all did in our heads. "Where Salim slept last night." Aunt Gloria gave a low moan and leaned over her drink as if she felt ill. We were all thinking the same thought. Where, in this big, dark, dangerous city, was Salim going to sleep tonight? Chapter 14. 8 Theories. I lay on my bed that night, trying to ignore the shuffling coming from less than a metre away. I could smell shampoo and hear breathing that reminded me of a restless panther. It was Kat on the lilo where Salim had been the night before. The city noises came through the open window. Lorries pounded down the main road. Aircraft droned overhead. I imagined a great anvil-shaped cloud forming over south-east London and hot air rising in convection currents. There was an instability in the upper atmosphere. I often don't sleep at night. My brain is filled with all the strange facts about the world. I switch on my reading lamp and listen to the shipping forecasts on the radio on low volume. I get out my weather books. I study the charts of isobars and isotherms. I examine photographs of what the weather leaves behind. Dried up lakes, wrecked shanty towns, mudslides, people rowing boats around the roofs of their houses. And I plan how and when I'll grow up I will help people prepare for the disasters, save their lives and their money, and advise governments on how to manage the weather. But tonight I couldn't switch on the light, because of Kat. I think the molecules in my brain went haywire, because all I could think of were Dodos, chasing Lord Lucan, who was sailing away in the Mary Celeste towards an evening sky, with a giant bicycle wheel for a moon. I saw Salim waving from the deck, just as he'd waved that last time before boarding his pod. I heard Aunt Gloria's voice saying it was me that had suggested going to the London Eye, when it hadn't been. I saw Mum's hand flicking me away like a fly. "Ted!" Kat was awake. "Ted!" What? Are you awake?" "Yes." "So am I." She sat upright and I saw her reach over for the bedside lamp. She switched it on and we blinked at each other. "It's no good, we've got to talk about it." She sat with her arms clasped around her knees and her head on her kneecaps. Her strands of brown hair flopped untidily over her shoulders. I said. Yourself," she said. It took me a moment to realise she was imitating me. She smiled. "Maybe if I sound like you, I'll think like you, Ted." "I don't think thinking like me is any better than thinking like you," I said. We listened to my alarm clock ticking. "Ted, what strikes you as the oddest thing about Salim's disappearance?" "The fact that he disappeared from a sealed pod," I said. Kat nodded. "He went up the eye and didn't come down." "Definitely odd," I said. "And nobody else, not the police, nor Mum, nor Dad, nor Auntie Glo, seems to realise how odd. They all ignore what we keep telling them and make out how we just weren't paying attention and missed him somehow. But that's not possible, is it?" "Possible, yes. Probable, no," I said. "We saw 2 capsules empty out before he came down and several after. I timed how long he was up with my watch. There is only a small margin of error possible." "So what happened? Where did he get to?" "I have 8 different theories," I said. Kat was impressed. 8 different theories. 8. One of them must be correct unless there's one or more theories I'm missing. What if I write them down?" Kat grabbed a piece of paper from my desk and I dictated to her the following list. This is what Kat wrote, with her own comment after each theory saying how likely she thought it. Number 1. Salim hid in the pod, under the seat maybe, and went round 3 or more times, getting out when we'd given up looking. Just possible, worth checking out. 2. Ted's watch went wrong. Salim got out of his pod when we weren't there to meet him. Unlikely, just checked Ted's watch, 23:43. His alarm clock says same. It's keeping perfect time. Ted says he checked it 5 times against Big Ben while we were out today. 3. Salim got out of his pod but we missed him somehow by accident and he didn't see us either. What parents? Police think, but we think only a 2% chance. We both kept a lookout on everybody that came out, and there were never many people at once. Salim would have had to miss us too, unless... Number 4. Salim either deliberately avoided us or was suffering from amnesia, memory loss. This theory means he must either have wanted to run away or was perhaps knocked on the head and somehow forgot about us. But we were standing there, looking at everybody as they came off, and we still don't know how we'd have missed him, even if he didn't want us to see him, or forgot what we looked like. So really, as unlikely as number 3. Number 5. Salim spontaneously combusted. I've never heard of this, but Ted seems to think people sometimes vanish into a puff of smoke. He says it's a rare but documented phenomenon and works like local thunderstorms. Not likely. Hardly counts. Number 6. Salim emerged from the pod in disguise. Possible, but going by the other people who got out of the pod, the Japanese tourists, women, tiny children, etc., highly improbable. The person who looked most like Salim was the boyfriend of the girl in the pink jacket, but he was plumper with a much fuller face. Definitely not Salim. Anyway, how would he have changed clothes without anybody in the tiny pod noticing? Number 7. Salim went into a time warp. He could be stranded in another time or even a parallel universe. Probability, factor 0, as with theory 5. Number 8. Salim emerged from the pod hiding beneath somebody else's clothes. When we got to this last theory, Kat looked at me over the top of her pen. She didn't even bother writing down her comment. "You remember how Laurel and Hardy almost get out of the Foreign Legion camp in The Flying Deuces?" I said. "It's the film we watch with Dad every Christmas. Ollie, the fat one, is heartbroken because the girl he loves doesn't love him, and he wants to forget her, and a man tells him that if he joins the Foreign Legion, he will forget her. So he joins the Foreign Legion, and Stan, the thin one, joins too. But the Foreign Legion is not very nice. They have to wash an endless mountain of clothes, which would take the rest of their lives to do, so they decide to escape." "Don't you remember?" I said. "They hide in the robes of these Arab men as they're walking towards the gates." "I remember," Kat said, "and that's the daftest of the lot." "But you remember those African women," I said. "They had long flowing robes. And there was the big man in the long raincoat. OK, she rolled her eyes so that I could only see the whites. She then wrote down after Theory 8, "Can Ted hide in my clothes without Mum noticing? I don't think so, but we can try." Kat looked over the list. "They're not very promising. Are you sure there aren't any better theories? Otherwise we're just going to have to accept that the police and all are right." I thought hard. Then I had what people call an inspiration. An inspiration is an idea that seems to come from nowhere. In the olden days, people thought inspiration came from the gods, or God, depending on if you were a polytheist or a monotheist, breathing an idea into your brain. "There is a ninth theory," I said, my hand flapping. "Not something weird like aliens beaming Salim up to their spaceship or him slipping between dimensions or—" "No, not weird," I said. "In fact, I think it's the best theory of all." But before I could say what it was, the phone rang.